my very great pleasure to welcome Liz Gerber as our keynote speaker today. Liz.
Thank you, Tom. What am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about something that I'm absolutely passionate about, and it's really the role that I guess Lawrence Lessig talked about 16 years ago. Is that what you said? The role of technology and how it's changing, how we work together, how we collaborate, and particularly how we collaborate around new product development. So let's get real here. Let me tell you exactly what it's been. The goal of my talk is first to talk about my excitement in the potential of technology in new product development. And then the second part of my talk is to talk to you about some challenges and opportunities that we have, and finally conclude with some solutions, some attempts at approaches that we have for tackling these problems. So my hope is that you ask questions throughout. As the students who met with me this morning, I'm honest and ready and willing to take questions, and really want this to be a conversation rather than a one-way dialogue. Okay, so let's talk with an image you probably didn't expect me to begin with. Does anybody know what this is? Insulin, great, excellent. It's a child self-injecting themselves with insulin. A child with an autoimmune disease of type 1 diabetes. This is a disease that prevents people from naturally creating sufficient amount of insulin for their pancreas. And in this picture, a young girl is injecting herself with insulin. And I find this both scary and exciting. I find it scary because these young children, for example, this boy, is having to manage this chronic disease and trying to understand a very complex medical procedure at a very young age. And the consequence and the cost of not managing this is life-threatening, honestly. He could have various illnesses, his body physically, mentally, he could be reacting to low insulin. And so kids, as not surprisingly, really struggle to manage this. And this is something that I think adults struggle with. And so you can imagine a young boy like this trying to understand how is it that they can manage this complex diagnosis of diabetes. Well, here's an interesting product that recently came along. This is Jerry the bear. Jerry is a stuffed animal, as you can tell, who is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He has different food represented on these circular pallets, as well as his own insulin pen, and then a feedback system that basically can tell children how he's feeling, what his insulin level is, what his symptoms are, and then they can also give him and treat him when he needs more insulin. So here's a photograph of some boys interacting with Jerry. These boys were recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and they're trying to understand, again, the complex medical procedures they'll need to do with themselves with Jerry. And what I think is particularly interesting is when Jerry is not feeling well, he'll communicate with his owner, with one of the boys, and say, blood sugar is low, and the boys will think, okay, it's time to give him a juice box, it's time to attend to him. And you're probably not surprised to hear that kids are developing very strong relationships with these stuffed animals. And they're setting places for them at the dinner table and bringing them to bed with them at night. But really the exciting part for me and for the people who are creating this is that it's empowering these kids who once felt very unempowered and overwhelmed by the complexity of this, and making it something that's enjoyable, something where they can take care of it and they can understand. And the interesting story to me is that this kind of process typically would take place by organizations such as these. So the development of a product like Jerry the bear would happen through diabetes, perhaps Novo Nordisk, which is one of the largest diabetic software product companies, or perhaps through a Mattel. But instead it didn't come about through these. And that, to me, is the exciting story of today. Instead, it came about through Hannah and Aaron. These are two undergraduate students who were interested in, actually, as the story goes, they were actually visiting a local a local family and meeting with a child who had just been recently diagnosed with this chronic disease. And they noticed something interesting. They noticed that the way that the child was treating the stuffed animals was different. They were taking care of it. And they thought, what if we could use that interaction and that desire to care for a stuffed animal? What if we could use that to actually help them manage, and their parents manage, the very stressful process of managing for diabetes? And so with that in mind, they followed a product development process, which maybe some in the audience know. This is a pretty standard process. It starts with first developing the idea, and then you test the idea. You then produce it, and then you market it. What's just blows my mind and is particularly exciting is that instead, they followed this standard process, if you will, for product development that's been taught for years, but instead they relied on an ecosystem, ecology rather, of platforms to support the product development process. So they weren't in a formal organization. They were instead relying on these various platforms. Now I have logos up here of various platforms that represent what's more important, What's less important is the actual platforms and more the interactions that occur. And I'll illustrate what I mean by that through each step. So first was in the development stage, really thinking about how to identify, generate, and deliberate, select concepts with a great diversity of stakeholders. So not just children, not just adults, but caregivers, health professionals, and they could do a lot of this through web forums, and the discussions that were going on and the level of engagement and the honesty about the challenges that people were facing when newly diagnosed were quite explicit. Through social networks, they could have conversations with people about what was happening, what ideas they were thinking about going with, and then also relying on paid task markets to test ideas with a variety of folks. Here's Aaron. Again, I just want to remind you, young guy, working out the innards of Jerry. And when he had questions, he could turn to traditional experts, but he also did something that was very different and interesting. Again, he was looking online and trying to figure out how could he learn from other people's examples. So, for example, with soldering, how could we go on and look through instructional videos that were online to learn about the expert practices of soldering? He went through online portfolios to understand different projects that were related in this space. So in the soft durables area, how is it that people had manufactured in these process? In the online portfolios, people were very explicit about what they had done, and so he could learn a lot through this transparent process. And then finally, on crowdfunding platforms, he was able to develop ideas by seeing what ideas had been popular and relatable in this space and what had not, and what kind of comments had people put up. So the thing that's particularly interesting to me is that the transparency of the product development process is enabled by these platforms in a way that wasn't before and allows people like Aaron to do this. In the third phase, in testing, again, the use and reliance on digital technology was very interesting to me. They could get annotated feedback online, they could have live video chats to talk about whether an idea was working, and then they could do really crowdsourcing, mobile on-the-go crowdsourcing to get people's opinions while they were in context about what was working for them and what wasn't working for them around this particular idea. And they did so, they were able to go through this process and test 29 different prototypes very rapidly and at limited expense with hundreds of people because they were relying on these technologies. And then lastly, they were able to market and spread stories and build an audience really for this product through their networks. They relied on personal networks such as Facebook. Here they have a Facebook page, interest-based networks. They had a video channel. They've just put up a new video of the new version of what this looks like. And they're able to have conversations in a way that traditional product development folks would not have been able to have. And then lastly, in the production, we've seen increased use of, again, crowdfunding. This is the online request for funds and solicitation from hundreds of people as opposed to a single entity or a few single entities. The use of paid task markets also to develop and actually produce certain ideas, and then 3D printing is changing the way in which they can do this. Hannah and Aaron's story is one story. There are many stories out there that are the process by which they use technology and adjusted their process is fascinating to me. And so now I want to go through, as contrast, what I'm starting to take for granted as the new norm, the new product development, and show you what it standard looks like, I should say. So what would Novardisk or Mattel do in their standard process? Again, they'd follow a typical process like this from develop, test, produce, market. But instead of, to get across the functional stages, they'd rely on this infrastructure, this deep infrastructure of expertise and departments who had been explicitly hired and engaged to complete those skills and that work. And so here's what it might look like. Here's what develop might look like. You may have marketing and engineering and sales together here, planning out and trying to figure out what is possible, what's feasible. I'm remarking just at the age of the people in this picture. It's a different group of people. You then might have some kind of testing. This is, for anybody who hasn't seen this before, this is a traditional focus group that happens. So you have a window, you have a recreated living room scene on one side so people can come in and feel comfortable. On the other side, behind a glass window, you have people looking in and you observe them talking about the product and trying to understand what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And then connections with large manufacturers to produce thousands and millions of these. And then finally, you go to this exclusive and highly interesting event, which is called Toy Fair. Has anybody been to Toy Fair? It is the central place for buyers and sellers of toys. That happens in New York every year. It's the B2B marketplace for toys. And what always strikes me, I've been to this event, and what always strikes me is the lack of children at it. And I'm always, it's really discomforting, actually, the lack of children, but lots of adults making decisions about what children would like. Okay, so again, as contrast, this was the traditional infrastructure that would support the product development process, but instead of this, what we're seeing is this. And so, in summary, to highlight the excitement that I have for this is there's new levels of participation. There's a certain rapid iteration that they can go through. You can leverage the internet and people in these communities for different skills that you might not have possibly considered or had access to. You can get feedback from a much broader group of people. You can seed stories and build an audience in a much more informal way, and consequently reach new people. And then you can receive funds, manufacturing, and sales support that typically people would have to rely on through a large organization. And so this is the part of the talk where I say this is exciting, and this is, what if the world looked like this? What would it look like? And now I want to transition into say, well, our research and our experience in this domain over the last 10 years has shown there's great opportunities in terms of engaging diverse people who work on different challenges that large companies might not work on. There's great promise in this area, and yet there are challenges. And my hope is to articulate some of the challenges and then invite you to talk with me about how together we might address those challenges so that we can continue to engage more and diverse groups of people working on problems that really affect our day-to-day. So let me go through what some of the opportunities and the challenges are. In our research, we've been noticing them coming up around these areas in particular. So there's roles, communication, trust, and reputation. And these are 4 areas that are particularly challenged. So let me get to roles. The first thing we've been seeing is that people are really excited about the diversity of roles. So somebody will say, I love that I get to be both a creative and a suit, is the way they described it. I get to be both a mentor and a funder. I get to take on all these different roles in a way that before I was much more siloed in one area. The flip side of that is that these responsibilities are rapidly changing. So this is, there's a story of a man who was saying, with one side I'll be doing customer service and I'll be talking with a potential customer, on the other side I'm doing operations and trying to manage how is it that we get all these products that I now have out through UPS in an efficient and time-sensitive manner. So being able to flip between these different roles. The other thing we're hearing is that a lot of these projects, people often get into them thinking they're pretty straightforward, and they don't understand the complexity of all the pieces that need to work, and lack critical skills for managing the complexity. So, and for managing all the different parts that have to go. So how is it that you think about, we used to have let's say a 41,000 person organization with all these different siloed expertise, and now it's a few people trying to do all these different parts. We're also hearing that, again, excitement for the different skills that people are learning. One person reported to us, I felt like they were talking about a crowdfunding campaign. By doing a crowdfunding campaign, I feel like I got a mini hands-on MBA. But they can also feel really overwhelmed and that there's too much. And it can lead to burnout. And we have stories of people quitting partway through the process because they didn't understand the complexity, and they found it was overwhelming for them. So again, I just want to go back to the infrastructure that we have in traditional organizations. We have clear guidelines about the relationships and the roles, and how these folks are connected. But in this collective innovation instance, it's not clearly set up. And so cause and confusion in the roles also leads to confusion around communication. So what we're finding with technology embedded in the development process is that, again, lower cost of communication and deliberation, people can very quickly broadcast messages that they need for help, for resources, or challenges that they have, whether they be informational, financial, emotional support. I'm sure many of you have seen, hey, I'm going out, I'm pitching this idea on Kickstarter next week, give me support, think of me. And yet the flip side of that is that they actually have to manage many relationships. So in the past, you might have one or two people that you have to report to and coordinate with, and now there are thousands of people. And so how is it that you navigate and manage these complex relationships while you're also doing this development process? So how can you manage both? In one case, we had people asking for product input. This was on a folding snowshoe, asking some folks for ideas about how they could improve it. And at first they were excited to get the feedback. And then after a while, they had too much, and then they had to negotiate between two very strong-minded people about one wanted one thing and the other wanted the other thing. And then they were managing this process that they didn't anticipate. Another opportunity and challenge around the communication is that the level of transparency that's expected is quite high. So no longer can you go behind closed doors and come out in a couple months when you're done. The expectation for photographs and progress reports of everything that's being done is expected. And so I liken this for academics to imagine if every day you wrote a report to your dean that said exactly what you did that day, the students you interacted with, the work you did, or if you're a student, every day writing a public report of what you did and how you're making progress or how you're not making progress. And then people responding to you every day and you having to keep up these relationships. An interesting thing, especially in the crowdfunding domain, that we're finding is that the relationships can be quite collegial up until the point at which the product fails to be delivered on time. 75% of products fail to deliver on time. This is a snippet from a website of, I have not received my kits. They're waiting for this kit. Can you contact me? Your emails kept getting returned as undeliverable. We have stories of people feeling so overwhelmed by the customer service and not even able to manage it that they've actually modified the interface so that all the negative comments that customers have given don't show up, and they only filter for positive comments to give the impression that everything is going smoothly, and so they don't have to manage that. And an interesting change that's happened on this interface, this is the Kickstarter interface recently, is this, I was on there the other day and I was asked to leave a comment, and for the first time I was actually reminded to be respectful and considerate. which I thought was a really interesting signal of the behavior that people are representing. What used to be, and for many people is still a tight and supportive community, there's also new people coming on saying, I want what I want. They're thinking of it as e-commerce. I want what I want when I want it. And what's interesting to me is that all of these, now they've figured out the bug, the man, you can no longer modify the interface, let me put it that way. These are rich and permanent traces of communication. And so what comes up here is part of your identity. And we have people telling us, I get comments here that I'm not prepared, critiques that I'm not prepared to deal with. The positive comments are no problem. It's the public-facing critiques when they're already working on something that's not finalized. Another in the communication realm is that we've been finding very interesting is that there's this new volume of information in terms of feedback on what people are working on. People are, I think you all know this, we all experience this information overload. Well, now they're dealing with this in their product development process. And while some of it they find very helpful, others there's confusion about, there's a lot of noise out there, a lot of it can be overwhelming, and a lot of it can lack grounding. So one of the interesting things that happens within an organization is that everybody has the grounding of what you're working on. And when you're now opening up this product development process and engaging many, many more people, how do you give them sufficient information to understand what's going on, but not so much information that they won't engage, or not so much information that you reveal everything that you're doing. So understanding the amount of information that you can reveal. And then in the trust realm, I think it's exciting and interesting when trust can be developed relationally. So a lot of trust is being developed through these conversations that the innovators are having online with supporters of different kinds. And it's not based on the institution from which they're coming. And they're very excited about this, that they can get right into the conversation. The flip side of this is that when it switches to a transactional relationship, they become open to potentially people taking their ideas and using them as their own. This is we hear a lot of stories of people saying, I put something up there. This is an example of somebody who had this necklace business that they were putting on Kickstarter, and then later found out that Urban Outfitters had curiously was selling a very similar product to many other people. And so there was actually a really interesting social media backlash on this to say, hey, Urban Outfitters, this is not acceptable. Here they had put themselves out, they wanted to be trustworthy, they wanted to engage with the community, and then they had been taken advantage of. In terms of reputation, again, I mentioned this a bit, there is a desire, the community wants to believe in people. They want to believe that people with no experience can manufacture a complex project in 8 weeks' time. They want to believe that they have the complex set of skills. And yet, the reality is that most people are poorly prepared. And so, again, this gets to the challenge of missteps in this space. If you misstep, there's a permanent trace. So forever I will be able to go on and know and find this project that was going for $72,000, only got 2, had 3 backers, and only 5 days to go. So this is a permanent trace of their intention and effort to develop a product. What we're finding is that initially the barrier to entry for participation was quite low, but the professionalization and the increasing attraction to professionals has caused people to be intimidated by going on. Anybody who's been following Kickstarter in particular over the last 6 years, you'll notice you used to be able to do a video in your basement with your cell phone mic, and the level has completely changed in terms of what's expected. So we have these opportunities and we have these challenges. We have this opportunity for greater flexibility and sense of agency in the roles, but we also have the challenge that that people are overwhelmed by the number of skills they need to learn and experiencing burnout. We have this awesome opportunity that communication is low cost, accessible, and at the same time the challenge that we have in other domains of our life that it's overwhelming and of variable quality. We have trust opportunities and challenges, and reputation opportunities and challenges. And so when I was thinking about this as a phenomenon, I got my students and my colleagues and I got really excited thinking about there's great potential in this. We're very excited. Again, the reason we're excited about this is engaging more diverse people to work on projects that are more of broader interest to a larger group of people, but how do we support this? And so I'm gonna spend the last part of my talk overviewing two approaches that I've taken with my colleagues. I wanna emphasize that this work could not be possible without incredible collaborators. And the two projects I want to talk about, one Dean Finholt already mentioned, is Design for America, and the second one is what we're calling Loft, which is effectively a digital home base for doing collective innovation. So let me start with Design for America, which is, Dean Finholt described it very well. It's really both a learning and doing experience in collective innovation. So let me give you a little background on what this is. It's a national network of students working to tackle social challenges in education, health, the economy, and it's based through university studios. A shout out to Michigan. Where are my Michigan folks here? There they are. Hi guys. I'm very excited that Michigan's excited about this. And really the goal is to take ideas from idea to implementation. So unlike in a class where you might have a 10 or a 15-week semester and you hand in a report and the idea is at the end, what you're doing is actually implementing in the local community. And so the way the program's been designed is to think about what is in your local community. So not what's far away, what's hard to get to, but what's easy to get to that you can very closely see. So this is a circle I drew around the Northwestern campus. What's in this possible space? And what's compelling to you in this possible space? So one of our first projects involved students walking from the campus up to a hospital that was just a half a mile away. They could get to it easily, and by being able to get to it easily, they could actually start to observe what problems were there and get to know the different stakeholders very intimately, spend the night there, checking out what's happening. They were not reading about this problem, they were experiencing the problem. So how do we do this? This is an extracurricular initiative, and the way that we do this is that we have a national hub at Northwestern, and we have monthly calls and annual meetup, annual workshops that people get together with, and then we have the network in which they're connected. And so what they can do through this mechanism that we've set up is they can learn a lot of these skills that they were lacking, was lacking in the original case study I shared. So they can learn the planning, the development, and the testing, the manufacturing, marketing. They can learn how to tap diverse networks. So I don't think this is something that comes necessarily naturally. It's a skill that has to be fostered and identified. They work across domains, and they learn how to lay the foundation for an online reputation. So here's a few of we've had, I believe, over 650 projects at this point, a few examples of them. And it's always striking to me when I ask the students, what is this about? What does this mean to you? And I'll just, two things that people have said, lines that are especially poignant to me is, other classes handed us the problem on a platter and told us, here's what the problem is, and you have to figure it out. In DFA, you have to figure out what the problem is. So there's a focus on understanding what the problem is and then attacking it. Another one, DFA pushed me into being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And they're uncomfortable with many things, not just the process, but the engagement with the community. It can be very uncomfortable engaging with a much broader, diverse group of folks, from the peers that you're working with, both at the university, at your studio, as well as across the country, the partners that you may have. It's amazing how terrifying it is for many people to go out and talk with partners and ask them, what's challenging you? How can I possibly help you? I find that once they do, there's a certain sense of, there's a new meaning that what they're doing on campus can be helpful. They work with mentors and then domain experts. What's particularly exciting for me is that they're working on very interdisciplinary teams. So what I'm describing is not just an engineering-led venture. This is a breakdown most recently of the different majors. And to be sure, we do have a number. I would say, almost half have math, natural sciences and math, but then the other half is really quite broad. I have a student who came to me and said, I was terrified of the shop. I didn't want to build anything. I'm a music major, but as soon as I knew what my project was about and I knew why I wanted to build it, I was motivated to learn these things that I was terrified to learn before. And that's what got me learning the new skills. I'm very proud of this fact. We have 57% who self-identify as female. Again, if you look at the statistics of who participates in innovation, this is not the split you see. It's quite different. And what's very curious to me is how they're using this project work as real project work, and they're talking about it with future employers and investors as real work, and employers are taking them seriously. They're not saying, oh, that was a nice class project you did. They're saying, this is a really interesting project you worked on, and I appreciate, they'll often say, that you acknowledged that it didn't work, or you acknowledged it did work, but here's the next steps. And so the idea that these students are working on projects that continue beyond the confines of the classroom, and that they continue beyond even the confines of their university. They'll sometimes collaborate with each other, is remarkable and exciting. In terms of impact to date, imperfect measures of impact, but we've had approximately 3,000 students participate, over 650 projects that have launched to, again, and when I want to be really clear, launch with the idea of impact. So this is not, I'm going to take on this project and I'll see where I get in 15 weeks. It's, I'm going to take on this project, I'm going to partner with a local community partner and look them in the eye and commit to following through. And then I put money on here. We've had $17.7 million secured to scale these ideas. I'm hesitant of this as a marker of success, and that is because there's many different paths to implementation, and entrepreneurship is not the only one. And so while some students have certainly gone on to launch companies, others have just established very strong relationships with the partner organizations and implemented in a way that did not require extracurricular or additional fundraising. In terms of scaling, one of the interesting benefits of this model is that because we have students, we are focused on America right now, we have students who are actually participating in these 36 different studio chapters that are actually coming throughout the globe, right? Just as University of Michigan is a very diverse place, people come from all over, it's representative of really of the globe. And what this means is that people are now taking this model back to their hometown or back to their high school or back to their, once they graduate, to the city in which they move to, and thinking about how do I bring this model to my country. So we have Design for Taiwan. We're in discussions with Design for Taiwan, Design for Pakistan, and Design for China, which is really, really interesting to me to think that this could be a new way in which we engage many people in this collective innovation process, and diverse people. We also have high school. I'm often asked, well, what about high school? What about grade school? I was just asked about kindergarten, and how to scale at those levels. We're still, it's an experiment. We're playing with what kind of, where the right time of intervention and support is, and what people can do most effectively. Okay, so this is great, and then this becomes, the School of Information will appreciate that this becomes a massive scaling challenge, right? To have this many organizations and this many people working on this many projects that don't have clear guidelines about where to go. They're all uniquely different. So typically, an instructor to make their life easy takes one problem and gives the problem to everybody in the room, and then looks at all the problems and can grade them and give them feedback quite easily on this. Instead, we're having everybody go out and work on their own project. So everybody's effectively working on a unique assignment, if you will. And so I've been working with my amazing colleague, Matt Easterday, who's an ed technologist, to work on something that we're calling the Loft. So this is effectively a digital platform that allows people to find each other who are working on similar problems, allows them to find a community of others, allows them to find a process and a way of working through this, as well as allows them to find the much needed mentoring that they need. So I'll walk through very briefly through what this looks like. You're welcome to go on it. We have both, right now we have Design for America on it. We have a institute called Roosevelt Policy Institute, they're a national student-led policy organization that we're looking at how is it that we support these networked organizations and provide them the support and the mentoring that they need. So they're on it as well. And we have different people coming into us every day saying, I now have this networked, distributed organization. Everybody's working on their own project. How do I manage that? How do I work with that? And so what we found, and again, this is really very much a design research process. We have people active on it and trying to learn what's needed and what works, especially in these extracurricular environments where nobody's telling you what to do. It's really a self-directed experience. So the first part of this, the first tool we have is this idea of goals. So we have what we call design method badges, and we were very hesitant to use the word badges, but think of this as like milestones. These are things that are useful to do in the product development process. And we have some basic instruction about how to do that. So here's an example of one. Then from that, we have a library of techniques, design techniques, and how-to examples. And I think this is kind of the powerful part, is that by putting this online, we can actually, people share their work online, and we can actually start to collect it. And so people are not just reading a generic example of how to do something, but they're reading how a team across the country worked on something. So they're actually looking at concrete examples, and they can reach out to those people to actually see what's going on. Not surprisingly, we found that planning tools are particularly important, helping people plan their work, set priorities, track progress, et cetera. But again, this can't be in this is again an extracurricular setting, can't emphasize that enough. So how do you make it playful? How do you make it exciting to set short-term objectives and tasks out there? So this is an example. We're taking a lot from the agile programming in computer science to think about sprint planning. And then the last two are around crowd critique, or crowd critique we're calling, as well as cheering, and we're trying to think, how can you use larger groups of people, not just people in your network, but actually beyond. And the idea is by having many people on this, you can tap to a much larger audience. And having really an interesting time playing around with this idea of how do you get people to effectively cheer, and what kind of cheering is appreciated at what time, and what kind of pushing is appreciated at what time, and having a lot of, this is where we get into the laboratory studies where we make small manipulations to the different, to the interface and try and figure out what creates more engagement. So, but this is an over-level tool. It's particularly exciting to work on a tool that people are using and depend on. It causes the product developer in me want to make things really working and have high quality, but then the researcher in me excited that we can rapidly iterate in this way. And so what I've described to you is quick some of the opportunities and challenges in collective innovation, and the reason for all this is I'm not coming from with a goal of having technology save us. I want to emphasize enough. I want to end on a note that my real goal and my passion is for us being able to solve problems, local social problems, for kids like this girl, that are meaningful and impactful, and that Mattel is probably not going to take on, Novo Nordisk is probably not going to take on, but are fundamentally going to change the way that people like this live their everyday lives. So with that, I'd like to thank you and thank my incredible collaborators for this opportunity to share and talk with you today. Thank you.